This is our league, and this is your league. From the 55-yard line on CFL America Radio and the Sports History Network.
Stand by, 15 seconds to air. Stand by all cameras and videotape.
Ready with your opening graphics. Stand by, Howard. Here we come, Frank. Ready, Don.
Stand by audio, your opening music, and roll tape.
Take tape.
Hopes for the new year actually begin just a few weeks after the old season is ended, with the NFL draft of college players.
Unlike today, when dozens of players attend a primetime event for which NFL fans line up to get tickets.
Quiet down a little bit, please.
The 1974 draft started on a Tuesday morning with few spectators, and by all accounts, only one player, Ohio State's John Hicks, in attendance. The draft was 17 rounds long.
The delay was caused by a dispute between New Orleans and Detroit.
In the first 42 picks, tiny Tennessee State had more players taken than Notre Dame, Michigan, USC, and Oklahoma combined. All told, NFL clubs selected 76 running backs, 5 Hall of Famers, 1 future heavyweight boxer, and Dave Wanstead. Through it all, nicotine clouds filled the air. And by the end, the old ways that the NFL viewed the draft had gone up in smoke.
National Football League selection meeting is now in session. Pittsburgh selects Lynn Swann.
Winner Boomer. Is he going to go in the first round at all? That's why the Colts are picking second every year. Who in the hell is Mel Kiper?
Chargers select Eli Manning.
This is the Vince Lombardi Trophy for the winner of the Super Bowl.
As they hoisted pro football's big silver trophy in January 1974, the Miami Dolphins were the NFL's gold standard.
Touchdown, Larry Honka!
They'd been to 3 straight Super Bowls, won the previous 2, and completed the only perfect season in league history. And Miami did it with a team that wasn't built in its own draft. More than half of the 73 Dolphins were veterans who had come to Miami from different NFL clubs.
Bob Greasy was a first-round draft pick. Larry Zonka was a first-round draft pick. But around that, they filled in with guys that didn't have big names, but that they knew could play.
Like the Dolphins, many NFL teams were not built through the draft in 1974. Molding other people's players into champions had worked for Vince Lombardi and was now being successfully taken to new extremes by George Allen.
Let's watch Stubb here on this one now.
He had that over-the-hill gang, all these veterans, and his philosophy was keep old guys.
And that's where he coined the phrase, the future is now.
In other words, I don't want to draft guys and spend 5 years developing them. I want to win right now. When he went to Washington, he basically traded away entire drafts to bring in veteran players.
Draft picks were valuable commodities in order to get players to help you win.
Which everybody thought there was tremendous risk involved, but look at the success that he had. I mean, he took the Redskins and in 2 years had them winning, and the year after that he had them in a Super Bowl. So a lot of teams thought, if he can do that, we can do that.
40 men together can't lose. Okay.
But you could see you had to be as smart as George Allen to make it work.
The Houston Oilers of the day were apparently not that smart.
If you think for one damn minute I'm going to take a loss standing down, you just have another thought coming.
The proof was in their 1-13 record in both 1972 and 73, and in their personnel decisions leading up to the 1974 draft.
The Oilers traded their first-round pick and their third-round pick to the Cowboys for two players named Toady Smith and Billy Parks.
Toady Smith was a big guy who was the brother of Bubba Smith, but really hadn't established himself as anything other than the brother of Bubba Smith. And you had Billy Parks, who was a nice little receiver, but was not a difference-making kind of receiver. It certainly wasn't, you're talking about Lance Allworth here.
The Oilers were really down. They needed players.
Yeah, but that's not the kind of help you're talking about. You need top-of-the-draft players that are really going to come in and make a significant difference, not spare parts, which is basically what the Cowboys offered.
And they got the first pick in the draft. And, of course, the pick was traded not knowing necessarily it was going to be the first pick in the draft. It wound up being that.
It was a classic piece of the Cowboys being smarter than the other guy.
Gil Brandt of the Cowboys built his reputation on finding out everything he possibly could against a guy, well beyond what he did on the field.
Since their days as a struggling expansion team a decade earlier, the Dallas Brain Trust had embraced technology off the field to improve the Cowboys' performance on it. In doing so, the franchise of Gil Brandt had become known in league circles as the Computer Cowboys.
And we have a complete file, we think, on just about everybody that's ever played.
We actually trace football players right from actual game conditions. It's very important that it's from actual game conditions, since in a laboratory condition, athletes behave different.
The man is also very important.
Gil Brandt, how are you? Good to see you. Did a good job out there at practice today.
If you don't put good information into the computer cannot give you good results.
I don't think they had a cookie-cutter mold of saying this is the type of guy we got to have to play this position. The number one thing was bring me an athlete and we can teach him to play football.
In this way, Dallas was an exception to the NFL's conventional approach to the draft, though by 1974, they were not the only exception.
Well, the Steelers certainly did not build through the draft. They deconstructed through the draft. They traded all their draft picks away in the 60s. Chuck Noll came in 69 and said, we're not trading away draft picks anymore. We're going to build through the draft.
Clearly in stark contrast to what the Washington Redskins were doing at that time, trading for veteran players.
The Steelers in 72 had that lost barely in the AFC Championship game to an undefeated Miami team. And in 73, they made the playoffs, but they lost. So they went looking to upgrade themselves in the 74 draft. They were right there.
Coming up.
The 39th Annual National Football League Selection Meeting is now in session.
He said, I don't draft players for positions. I draft the best players. He said, you were the best player in that college draft.
Okay, take one. This is the voice around the NFL draft. Commissioner Pete Rozelle read off the draft choices. The first one going to the Cowboys because of a trade with Houston.
The Dallas Cowboys selection, Ed Jones, defensive end, Tennessee State.
Using the #1 overall pick on a defensive player from a Division II football program was an audacious move, even for the Computer Cowboys.
The Cowboys in the 70s had established themselves as one of the top franchises in the league. They did it by being bold, and not doing things the way everybody else did them.
We shocked everybody when we took Ed Jones from Tennessee State because none of the draft experts had him ranked at all.
Now, I was the first Division II player ever drafted #1 overall. During that era, #1 picks were from #1 Division I schools, #2 quarterbacks or running backs.
A lot of people didn't know about him in college, but obviously NFL teams did. And he had an excellent East-West Shrine game. He had really established himself in the offseason.
Jones' height made him distinctive, and so did the nickname he earned in college.
First day at practice, I walked into the equipment room. The longest pair of pants that the equipment manager had hit me above my knees. So I walk on the field, I don't remember which player it was, said, hey, you know you're too tall for football. They all got a big kick out of it. And when I walked into the dining room that evening for dinner, I heard one of them in the background say, there's too tall, and it stuck.
Dallas head coach Tom Landry saw a world of possibility in the unproven but athletically gifted Jones.
He said, I don't draft players for positions. I draft the best players. He said, you were the best player in that college draft. He said, I knew I'd find a place for you to play. He said, that's the way I draft.
Jones was a versatile athlete who excelled in several sports. Football wasn't even his first love.
Boxing's my favorite sport. I fought Golden Gloves in high school. My first fight, I knocked my opponent out, which I think is still a record, in 37 seconds.
Tennessee State was a small college that came up big in the 1974 draft.
There were really, really good players at some of these smaller schools. They just weren't as well known. But what changed in 1974 was that teams were willing to start drafting those players higher.
On the first round, Cincinnati selects Bill Kohler, defensive tackle, Montana State. Barty Smith, fullback, Richmond. Donald Reese, defensive end, Jackson State.
As a kid growing up, you almost felt you had to go to a big school. You had to go to one of the football U's to get a fair chance at trying to make it at the next level.
The 1974 draft saw low-profile programs gain in stature, but big-time college football still dominated the selection process. UCLA led all schools with 12 picks. Powerhouse Penn State boasted running back John Cappelletti, the country's most famous college player. In 1973, he won the Heisman Trophy after leading the Nittany Lions to an undefeated season. All across America, people knew the dramatic story of John's close bond with his terminally ill brother, Joey.
Joey Cappelletti.
The youngest member of my family, Joseph, is very ill. He has leukemia. And if I could dedicate this trophy to him tonight and give him a couple days of happiness, this is worth everything.
The Heisman winner's 1973 season was full of inspiration and hope.
Bob, do you have any quarrel with the choice of John Cappelletti?
I should say not. I've been just watching his progress all year. I like the way he talks, and I got to buy some of those humble pills.
Cappelletti's appealing personality was a given, but his chance for NFL success was a question mark.
He wasn't the guy really we cared to draft. Just wasn't a blazer, just didn't have that speed that we thought that we would want for our football team.
All right, this is simply a repeat of a previous announcement, simply a repeat. Los Angeles Rams select John Cappelletti, running back, Penn State.
The Rams didn't really need a running back. They already ran the ball as well as anybody in the National Football League. Why are they taking John Cappelletti? The short answer is because the NFL back then was so different in terms of offensive orientation. It was very much a running game. So teams had the idea that you can never have too many running backs.
11th overall pick John Cappelletti had the biggest name in college football. Too Tall Jones had the tallest frame. Billy Johnson had neither. Unheralded and undersized, Johnson played wide receiver at Division III Widener University. At 5 feet 9 inches, Johnson didn't fit the NFL mold.
He's too small, and, he's from Widener. Get to round 15, the Houston Oilers took Billy Johnson, and what we found out was he wasn't too small.
Over 14 NFL seasons, Johnson was an effective offensive weapon, who also became one of the greatest return specialists in the history of the game.
That's one of the things that I always remember about that draft was Sometimes you have to just trust your instincts. How tall a guy is, or how much he weighs, how big a school he played at a certain point, that doesn't matter. A guy can either play or he can't play. And sometimes you can just judge that by watching him. And anybody that had seen Billy Johnson play knew that this guy had remarkable talent.
Coming up on Caught in the Draft.
Pete Rozelle was friends with the Rams, and he decided to punish my dad.
And those guys that got kicked out of the ball game, I'll take care of your fight.
At every NFL draft, mysteries about which player will be selected when are typical. Questions about which team will select when are not. So when it became clear that no one knew the true owner of the 20th pick in the first round in 1974, chaos ensued. The mess began because of Washington's second-round pick in '74, which, prior to the draft, the Redskins had dealt to the Rams. The problem with that was that a year earlier, Washington had already traded the very same pick, their second choice in '74, to the New York Jets. Not until the eve of the '74 draft did anyone realize that the pick LA had gotten from Washington wasn't really Washington's to give.
You know, the way they used to keep track of draft picks in a 17-round draft was, we'll call it archaic. And when you're on a phone call late at night, Dad sometimes traded the same pick twice.
George made the draft such a farce that it was almost like people just didn't pay attention. Like George he's just trading his whole draft again, so nobody really did the accounting as they should have done. I mean, he was a guy that was really smart, and I don't want to say unscrupulous, but nothing was sacred with him. And when somebody would call him on it, he would profess that I had no idea, really.
There was a league's duty at the time to actually track the draft picks. It wasn't so much on the teams, because when you're making trades, there's no way to know exactly who has what.
The next choice is the San Francisco 49ers on a selection previously acquired through trade from the New England Patriots.
But Pete Rozelle was friends with the Rams, and he decided to punish my dad.
You have to keep pushing.
George Allen's claim that he'd made an honest mistake was not helped by the fact that he'd made the same honest mistake years earlier, when he was coaching the Rams and had traded one of their picks away twice. So in 1974, Pete Rozelle punished Allen's repeat offense by fining the Redskins $5,000 and awarding their first-round pick to Los Angeles, who traded it to the Bears.
Chicago Bears in the first round select Dave Gallagher, defensive lineman, Michigan.
The way that draft choices are viewed as precious today, that was not a consensus position held by everybody in pro football in those days. It had gotten to a few places, but it hadn't gotten everywhere yet.
Chuck Noll, besides wanting to build through the draft, one of his other edicts was, we will find the best athletes out there. And some of the great athletes of the day were playing at these small black colleges.
It doesn't matter to us where a prospect is. As you know, we have quite a few prospects from smaller schools.
John Stallworth from Alabama A&M. He didn't have a great 40 time, but Bill Nunn recognized he's not going to be running on as good of a surface as the guy from Ohio State, who might have a 1/10 of a second faster time.
And you look at the great players from small colleges, Joe Green to Dwight White, Mel Blount. They were able to find players that fit all over the country.
A 10th round choice from Arkansas A&M, from Texas Southern, from East Texas State, from North Texas State. 4 young men from tiny southern colleges.
Not to take anything away from Dick Haley and some of their other scouts that they had, but he was the big influence into the black colleges. That helped build that football team. In fact, I used to try to follow Bill around, because sometimes it was hard to get film. Bill knew how to get the film.
In the case of Stallworth, there was like one can of film.
Bill had instructions from the coach to keep it a weakness to someone else. Every time you walk by the film room, they were watching with the coaches, they were watching themselves. I think my dad was in there watching it with them, and we never sent it to anyone.
I mean, this worked out perfectly.
Stallworth, you see, he knew a little bit more probably than we did.
And that was probably a factor in one of the greatest drafts of all time.
There was no shortage of information when it came to other receivers in the '74 draft, particularly Lynn Swann, whose skill and charisma at USC had captured the attention of the pro football world.
I like to think of myself as a true competitor, and there's no more competition in the field than returning a punt when it's you and at least 9 guys that you have to get away from, mostly by yourself.
Pittsburgh up.
Chuck loved John Stallworth. But he went to Alabama A&M, one of those small black schools. Lynn Swann, he went to Southern Cal. Everybody knew who Lynn Swann was. Everybody knew Lynn Swann was going to be a first-round pick.
As the Steelers' internal debate continued, it appeared their discord on selecting a big school or small school receiver might cause Pittsburgh's selection time to expire, thus giving the Cowboys the chance to jump in front of them in line. Dallas prepared accordingly, filling out an index card with the player it wanted and racing to the podium. Had only a few more seconds passed, Dallas would have taken the 20th pick before Pittsburgh could. Instead, after 14 minutes and 55 seconds of their 15-minute selection time, the Steelers made a decision.
Pittsburgh on the first round selects Lynn Swann, wide receiver, Southern California.
The scouts, Nunn, Art Rooney Jr., Haley, all of them, convinced Chuck Swann would be gone if they didn't take him in the first round. Stallworth would still be there.
And as it turned out, they played it perfectly. The Dallas Cowboys were up next in the draft, and they were all set to take Lynn Swann, which is really a delicious part of the whole Steeler-Cowboy rivalry as it plays out over the rest of the decade, because how many big plays did Lynn Swann make against the Cowboys over the years?
The race for Swann at 20th overall may have been an early flashpoint in the eventual Pittsburgh-Dallas rivalry, but it would prove to be just one part of the Steelers' historic performance in the 1974 draft. Up next, the Pete not named Rozelle, who was making draft history in 1974.
If it wasn't for me, there would be no Mel Kiper.
In 1974, for in-depth draft coverage, there was essentially none. People talk about draft previews. There were no draft previews. It was hard enough to find draft reviews.
It was frustrating because there was just a lack of information out there about the NFL draft, which certainly from the time I remember being 6, 7, 8 years old, I had an interest in, because that's the only way you could improve your football team from year to year.
Well, in 1974, you don't have the fanaticism about the draft yet. But what you have is this amateur subculture of draft freaks who put out their own lists of draft rankings and that kind of thing.
This is how I would start before the season would go. I would break down by positions, name, height, weight, and college, and sometimes I'd put little notes after them, speed or lacking speed or something like that. When I got out of law school, just started doing that as a hobby. It was fascinating to see how teams drafted players, where mistakes were made. My brother Carl was doing similar stuff. We put it together, and that kind of got people's attention.
Pete and Carl Marasco were in Pro Football Weekly. That started bringing the draft to more people.
They were sort of Kiper before Kiper.
Yeah, the Marasco brothers, you go back and scouting players for the NFL, and gave you something you couldn't get anywhere else, which was an evaluation of players and an opinion on players. Somebody that you looked up to at that particular time and said, boy, they get it.
There's going to be misses. There's going to be a lot of good hits. There's going to be some misses. But that was the same as the pro teams. Finally, a fellow from the New York Times noticed it. He wrote about it.
Not only did it enhance the interest of people in the draft. It then spurred other people to think, I can do that.
His wife, Rhea.
There's a guy in Florida, Palmer Hughes.
Use thumbnail scouting reports, feed the appetites of thousands of hungry draft enthusiasts. The tools of his trade are a powerful television antenna, a battered armchair, a much-watched TV set, and a cubbyhole of an office where he compiles his reports.
What I try to do is actually pick the draft the way the pro teams do it, but I try to do it on my own and by myself. If somebody said I was a renegade, they would be right.
There was a guy in Cincinnati who put out the drugstore list.
Jerry Jones, not the Jerry Jones. It was by a pharmacist, and he was a big-time draft nerd. My earliest years covering the NFL, I would always used to think, man, get a life.
And so in the 70s, that built up, and it led to Mel Kiper and created what it is today, where pretty much everybody thinks they're a draft expert.
Perhaps no single evaluator of talent in the NFL of 1974 believed more strongly in his own expertise than Renegade owner Al Davis. He opted to have his Raider personnel do all their own player grading at a time when most NFL teams were part of cooperative scouting services.
Plesto, Bears, Lions, Eagles, Steelers, that's Plesto. SEPO was Central Eastern Personnel Organization. They were scouting combines. That was part of the mystique of the Raiders. We refused to be part of that.
I always wanted to belong to a combine because I wanted to get as much information on the player as I could. But Mr. Davis, when I was working there, you get the information. That's your job. Don't worry about somebody else's information.
Al trusted his own ability to pick players and find talent. Al was a really good coach before he became an owner.
The great rivalries continue.
And he could look at a player and decide whether this guy could play or whether he couldn't play. And more specifically, could he play for me?
Just win, baby.
They had a scouting network that went everywhere. There was a story that someone claimed that they went to the dark side of Africa. The only non-natives they found there were 2 missionaries and a scout from the Oakland Raiders. There may be some truth to that.
They made decisions based upon intelligence as well as, the 40 times. I was never timed in the 40 with the Raiders. I had hamstring problems. They didn't want to time us. They could tell in the practice if you could run fast enough. But they also had to know where you're going to make a mental error. So it was part of their system.
In the Raiders School of Player Grading, Dave Casper scored high marks, even while some of his numbers were not the most impressive.
He wasn't the fastest of guys. He was like a 4.7, but he was one of those guys who knew how to get open.
240-pound tight end Dave Casper was a massive spark plug of the Irish offense.
He had a reputation for not being the most coachable guy. There were some questions about how committed he was to football. But, Al Davis was a guy that was not afraid to take chances on someone.
Many other teams probably wouldn't have picked him in the second round. But that's a perfect example of the Raiders identifying what they wanted for their team and he being a perfect fit.
For years, the Raiders had been colliding with the Steelers in the battle for AFC supremacy.
And there's a collision.
But off the field, especially as it concerned finding the right players for their systems, Oakland and Pittsburgh were philosophically in sync. That was proven by both the Dave Casper pick in the second round and with the Steelers pick that followed it. Pittsburgh was looking for a new middle linebacker. But they needed more than a new player. They needed a new kind of player. One who could both support the run near the line of scrimmage and drop into deep zone pass coverage in Pittsburgh's new Cover 2 scheme.
Art Rooney Jr. went over to Kent State once, and they were practicing on some gravel. And he saw a skinny kid dive head first to make a tackle. And he says, that's one tough guy there.
Weighed 208 pounds, swear, 208 pounds. How's he going to play linebacker in the National Football League?
With the 46th overall pick, the Steelers passed on bigger players with bigger names, like linebacker Matt Blair, in favor of the tall, lanky Kent State Golden Flash, who fit Pittsburgh's new profile of a middle linebacker.
He could drop into pass coverage, so tight ends going across the middle, he could cover them. And he was tough enough to make the tackles that a middle linebacker should make. So I don't think there was really a debate when they drafted Jack Lambert, other than Chuck still wanted John Stallworth.
After taking Jack Lambert in the second round, the Steelers had no pick in the third. But when their turn came up in the fourth round, the player Chuck Noll coveted was still available. So the Steelers drafted receiver John Stallworth, before looking to the trenches in the fifth round with the selection of a center from Tomahawk, Wisconsin, named Mike Webster.
In terms of building a team that was going to be a perennial contender year in and year out, the Steelers were truly the model of the 70s. And there's a couple things that work there. One is appreciating the value of those draft choices, and two is knowing how to fit those players into your own system.
Coming up.
Boom, he slams the book shut. He said, "What kind of a signing bonus would it take for you to stay here?"
What kind of contract did you get, John?
I'm not in the liberty to discuss my contract out here. The Giants were satisfied, and they felt that we both felt that it was an adequate deal.
You have a dollar figure in mind here?
No, I didn't even talk to anybody yet. I just want to get reimbursed for the trip up here right now.
In 1974, draft picks who didn't like the money they were offered or the teams that selected them had few options. But that situation was about to change.
The NFL, since merging with the old AFL, hasn't had any competition to worry about except for a few players who straggle to the Canadian League. But even some of them eventually come back home. This year, though, there's a serious challenge for talent coming from the World Football League.
The World Football League had 12 teams and announced a 20-game schedule to begin in the summer of 1974.
Commissioner, do you think there's going to be any so-called price war between the new league and the NFL?
What it will come to is after our selection meeting, and then when the World Football League continues their draft, we'll just see what happens during the bidding for the playing talent.
There's one thing the NFL had thought it ended some years ago when they merged with the old AFL, but now with the WFL, here we go again.
The WFL held a rookie draft 1 week before the NFL did. Players picked by both leagues had newfound leverage. Guard Tom Condon, the Chiefs' 10th round pick from Boston College, used the WFL to squeeze more money out of the tight-fisted NFL team that drafted him.
Hank Stram offered me $2,000 to sign and a $14,000 base salary. And when he asked me what I thought about that, I said, well, gee, Coach, I said, it doesn't sound that good. And he said, really? And he had a book on his desk, and he opened up the book and put his glasses on, and he said, what round were you drafted in? And, of course, he knew. And I said, the 10th. And he flipped through the pages, and he stopped, and he looked up and said, we've never had a 10th round draft choice make our football team. He said, as far as I'm concerned, son, I've just offered you $2,000 for a summer job. And boom, he slams the book shut. I got drafted by the Boston Bulls of the WFL, and they offered me a $30,000 completely guaranteed contract. And so I called Hank Stram up, my first, individual negotiation. I didn't have an agent. And I said, Coach, thank you for everything you've done and as nice as you've been to me, but I'm going to go play for a $30,000 completely guaranteed contract with the Boston Bulls. After I went through my spiel about the Boston Bulls, he said, what kind of a signing bonus would it take for you to stay here? And I hadn't given this any thought at all, so I just blurted out a number that I thought was outrageous, and I said $10,000. And he said, what about the base salary? And I said 18, and he said, done.
Arizona State quarterback Danny White was drafted in the third round by Dallas, but opted to sign with the WFL's Memphis Southmen. White was the first quarterback taken in an NFL draft short on quality passers.
To the best of our knowledge, this is the first time that a quarterback was not chosen in the first round.
Every once in a while, you'll have a draft year where there just aren't quarterbacks there. 74, we kind of came up empty. Danny White was probably the best quarterback in that draft.
After him in the third round, you had guys like David James and Kim McQuilkin and Gary Marangi. I'm sure these are names that probably haven't been mentioned on TV since their NFL careers.
White earned valuable experience in the rival league and twice as much money as the Cowboys had offered him. But the WFL was spurned by the majority of players it had drafted.
I was drafted by the Birmingham Americans in the first round, and honestly, I never really considered it because ever since I could remember watching games on television, I wanted to play in the National Football League.
The WFL would fold midway through its second season, but its birth made an immediate impact on the NFL's status quo. The free-spending upstarts threw a light on the more established league's stagnant salary structure. In this regard, the WFL influenced the NFL Players Association strike of July 1974. The strike proved beneficial to that year's rookie class, but not in a financial sense.
Twice a day, the rookies are bussed onto the Green Bay Packer practice field, past the 2 or 3 striking veterans who are assigned to picket duty for the day. This has been going on for 3 weeks now.
We had a lot of rookies make that team that year. It gave us a chance to get in and get more coaching, get more teaching, get more training before the veterans came in.
The owners say they'll play out their schedule, even if they have to use only their rookies and the handful of veterans who have crossed the picket line.
The strike certainly helped me from a competitive standpoint, in that I got to be there for at least a month with all of the rookies and free agents, and I was doing pretty well. So it gave me some experience and a little bit of confidence, and of course I got some really good coaching.
Tom Condon played for 12 seasons and stands as an object lesson in the inexact science of drafting. 21 guards were selected ahead of the 250th overall pick. Only one of them had a career that lasted as long as Condon's did. Condon became a prime mover in a players' union that would take a more activist posture in the years to come.
They feel that we exercised our as far as we could, our symbolic gestures, and it's time to take that kind of stronger action.
Today, the rookie who haggled with Hank Stram is a powerful sports agent. Condon represents some of pro football's biggest names. His career success is one of the lasting legacies of the 1974 draft. Coming up on Caught in the Draft.
It just defies logic that you could come out of a draft with the talent that they did. That's like winning Powerball.
This is the second longest first round since the draft became combined in 1967. Finished 3 hours and 45 minutes.
And the 1974 draft still had 16 more rounds remaining. As Baseball Hall of Famer Yogi Berra once said, "It ain't over till it's over." As if to prove that point, Yogi's son Tim Berra, a wide receiver from UMass, was taken in round 17 by Baltimore. The eventual end of the 1974 draft marked the beginning of NFL careers.
6'9", 265-pound Ed Too Tall Jones, the NFL's #1 draft choice from Tennessee State. Like every #1, Jones was a marked man whose imposing talents came under the critical focus of many eyes.
When you look at the players who were taken, I don't know that you would say, oh, I can't believe Ed Too Tall Jones went first. This guy should have been. Because when you look at it, he had one of the better careers of anyone there.
Ed Too Tall Jones enjoyed a productive career in Dallas. In 1979, he quit football to pursue his favorite sport, professional boxing.
If I didn't think I had the talent and potential to be a heavyweight champ, I wouldn't be fighting.
So you're not going back at all?
No,
No
I
matter
definitely
what.
won't go back to football.
Jones won all 6 of his bouts, then returned to the Cowboys in 1980. He played for 10 more seasons, 15 in all. The Cowboys' 1974 draft also paid dividends over time. Dallas retained the rights to Danny White, who joined the team in 1976. 4 seasons later, he became the starting quarterback after Roger Staubach retired. White led the Cowboys to 3 consecutive NFC Championship games. By the time White took over as starter, the NFL had become a passing league. But when White was drafted in 1974, it was all about running and defense.
New York Jets, first-round selection, Carl Barceluskas. Defensive tackle, Indiana.
Bill Sandifer, defensive tackle, UCLA.
Commissioner, there seems to be a look for the defensive man, the lineman lately in football. Is this a trend that you seem to see also?
Well, I think many coaches are identifying success with very strong defenses, and I think that they also feel perhaps that outstanding college defensive players are more apt to hold their form in pro ball than an offensive player. And yet you did see an outstanding offensive back going on the second pick here today, Bo Matthews of Colorado to San Diego.
Bo Matthews was the first of 76 running backs caught in the draft. Matthews' 8-year NFL career was spent as a backup. Ball carrier John Cappelletti's heart and work ethic kept him in the league for 9 seasons. But like many Heisman Trophy winners, Cappelletti never attained the level of stardom he had enjoyed at the collegiate level.
John, people say that there's a jinx with Heisman Trophy winners. Do you agree?
People put a stigma on it because, you're almost a loser if you don't make it after you win a Heisman Trophy. And I don't think that's fair because, you won it because of a college career.
University of Florida halfback Nat Moore was drafted in the 3rd round by the Dolphins. But Miami took Moore with the intention of turning him into a wide receiver.
You got to think about how scary it is to switch positions. And in those days, there were no guaranteed contracts. You got to make the team. So I've got to learn a new position and make the team.
Moore went on to become one of the most prolific pass catchers in franchise history. Ray Rhodes was another draft choice who switched positions. The Giants' 10th round selection from Tulsa began his NFL career as a wide receiver. In 1977, Rhodes switched to cornerback. After his playing career ended, he became a successful defensive coordinator and head coach.
And today we had to go out and show people that they can't guarantee anything but death and taxes. That's all it's guaranteed.
Another eventual NFL head coach, Dave Wannstedt, was a 15th round draft choice of the Packers. He never played in the NFL. 5 Hall of Famers, including Oakland tight end Dave Casper, emerged from the 1974 draft.
Casper makes it over the shoulder, catch! The pass is caught by Casper, touchdown Raiders!
Casper is the only one of the 5 Hall of Famers from the 1974 draft who didn't play for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I think that the 74 draft will be remembered mostly for what it did for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
The Steelers getting 4 Hall of Famers out of that draft, especially when there are only 5 Hall of Famers in the entire draft, it's unbelievable. Because really, when you think of the probability of it, that's like winning Powerball.
I can't think of another draft where anybody had that kind of a haul that you come away with Lambert, Swann, Stallworth, Webster.
In 1974, Pittsburgh's rookies contributed to a 10-3-1 regular season record that catapulted the team to its first ever Super Bowl victory. The Steelers would win 3 more Lombardi trophies before the decade ended.
Bradshaw pumping, firing downfield. There goes Stallworth. He pulls it in at the 30, the 20, the 10, the 5, and it's a touchdown for Pittsburgh on the ball to Stallworth.
Lambert's walking by. Here's Harris telling him something and grabs the kicker. And Lambert at 6'5" works him over.
I think it's not just the greatest draft by any team in the history of the NFL. I think it's the greatest draft by any team in the history of professional sports.
Swann makes his circus catch in the end zone. Unbelievable. The Pittsburgh Steelers are the champions of the National Football League for the 4th time.
By building a dynasty through the draft, the Steelers ensured that the prevailing philosophy of the future is now would be relegated to the past. The future of the draft itself was tied to the growth of cable television and an insatiable appetite for all things NFL. The event, as it was staged in 1974, was destined to become, like disco music, the AMC Gremlin, and wide lapels, a relic of the times.
Whether or not the NFL and AFC or the FC and